Art Shawcross began his life after dropping out of high school by joining the Army. When he was discharged, he began starting fires for fun and breaking into places. In May of 1972, Shawcross sexually assaulted and murdered 10-year-old Jake Owen Blake. 4 months later, he raped and killed 8-year-old Karen Hill. He confessed to both murders. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He was released on parole 14 and a half years later. In March 1988, he began murdering again, primarily prostitutes. He was convicted of 11 murders. Their ages ranged from 20 to 60 years old. All the murders took place between March of 1988 through December of 1989. He was taken into custody on January 3, 1990. Later, he was found guilty on 10 counts of murder in the second degree and was sentenced to 250 years to life in prison. Officials say if he would have been executed the first time he was sentenced, at least 9 lives would have been saved.
I'm actually in favor of the death penalty in murder cases, particularly premeditated murder cases. I believe that it is a deterrent to people, knowing that the possibility of the death penalty is out there if they do commit murder.
Is that I am for it. I feel that it would be economical on one hand, and whether it reduces the crime rate, who knows? Because I just feel a person that does murder somebody, that I don't really feel that life is too important to him to begin with, or her. So that's why they enjoy the freedom of actually being in prison and staying alive, but really what's being accomplished, rehabilitation, is such a small percentage. And I just probably in some regards, doing them a favor also.
Is probably my personal belief that almost like an eye for an eye, that if more specifically a child's life is taken by an individual, my personal opinion is that person should be put to death, because a lot of times you see it on the news a lot. And there's a trial just started this week with a girl who was on trial for murdering her own child. She was an adult. She knew what she was doing, and she took the life of an innocent little young child. How can you say that person's normal?
Child molesters, seriously, because it's something that really don't get rehab with, and basically premeditated murders. And I know there's various degrees of killing, but anybody that kills children, I mean, it should be immediate. They have no conscience really of life, and no compassion for life. I mean, it's just a situation that could definitely be considered immediate.
I personally believe that it should be reserved just for murder cases, premeditated murder cases, certainly serial murderers.
If there's any type of premeditated torturous crimes, maybe a murder against a child. And the reason for that is simply because there are certain situations where a death could take place, or a homicide, and that's why there are, according to law, there are different degrees of homicide or of murder, simply because of that. If there's a premeditated, planned out situation where someone actually planned somebody's murder, as opposed to something in the heat of the moment.
I do agree that there should be different levels of murder. First-degree murder in Pennsylvania is premeditated murder. That's where someone planned out a crime and carried it through, taking steps towards that, as opposed to something that just happened in the heat of passion. There's also felony murder, where you go to commit a felony, like robbing a bank, and someone gets killed during the process. And if you were involved in the planning and the execution of the robbing of the bank, you can be found guilty of the felony murder even if you weren't the actual shooter, and I don't have a problem with that. I think if you're involved in something where someone could get killed, that you could face the death penalty as a result of that.
Abolitionists claim that there are alternatives to the death penalty. They say life in prison without parole serves just as well. Abolitionists claim that the death penalty is unconstitutional by quoting the Eighth Amendment, which forbids cruel and unusual punishment. So where does the Supreme Court stand on the cruel and unusual claim? In several cases, they stated it is not cruel and unusual, and it is, in fact, constitutionally acceptable remedy for a criminal act.
The death penalty, also known as capital punishment, is used in 34 out of 50 states in the United States. Some of the states that do have the death penalty are Alaska, New York, New Jersey, and West Virginia. There are 12 others without the death penalty. Since 1976, there has been 1,246 executions throughout the United States. In 1999, 98 people were executed. This year alone, there has already been 12. Pennsylvania death penalty only applies for aggravated murder and felony murder 1. 64% favor the death penalty, 29% oppose the death penalty. Advocates for the death penalty are: it deters crime, it's a good tool for prosecutors, and it provides closure.
It does take a lot of work and money to keep someone in jail. That's why a lot of times, like, you would think it'd be cheaper to execute them, but there's a lot of money that goes into the appeals and the process of the lawyers and the judges going through the appeal process. So you would hope that the execution would make it less burden on the taxpayers. Oh, I do think that without all the appeals, the cost of the execution would be greatly decreased, especially a lot of the people on death row are indigent people, so they have court-appointed lawyers, so the taxpayers are paying for all of that. And then there's more psychiatric exams that they can't afford. Those are all paid for by the taxpayers as well.
We believe that in the long run, the death penalty will be an effective tool for prosecuting and deterring criminals. Even though life without parole appears to be cheaper up front, research has proved that it is more expensive in the long run. It costs $40,000 to $50,000 a year to keep a criminal in prison. That means, on average, it takes $2,250,000 to support a prisoner for 50 years. Keep in mind, some life sentences last longer than that. Though some make an argument that the death penalty violates the Eighth Amendment, the Supreme Courts, along with the majority of Americans, claim that it is neither cruel or unusual to use the death penalty. So ask yourself, would you rather let a known serial killer, child molester, rapist, or murderer live? Or would you rather stop them in their tracks?